The Galactic Diplomatic Corps had long been hailed as the pinnacle of civilized existence. Its gleaming offices, made of chrome and shining crystal, served as a constant reminder of their mastery over both technology and culture. To the Corps' members, the vast reaches of space were a playground where their sophisticated and highly evolved practices set the standard for all others, especially those from backwater planets. It was here, in the high-ceilinged halls of the harmonious Unity Station, that the latest addition to the interstellar community would be introduced with all the ceremony befitting a species that, according to the Corps, was still struggling to leave behind its barbaric origins. "Behold," Ambassador Zalex announced, his seven-limbed form shifting gracefully as he prepared to introduce the new representative of Earth. Zalex's species had spent millennia honing the delicate balance between bureaucratic efficiency and well-practiced condescension. His voice modulator emitted a tone that dripped with a form of humor so dry it was practically fossilized. The humans, finally sending their diplomat to the galactic fold. The assembled delegates, 12 different species, all far older and more evolved than humanity, observed with quiet, barely contained amusement. The Hulan delegates' chromatic displays shifted into patterns of mild confusion, while the Rian antennae twitched in mock interest. The Gazor delegation, a race of telepathic beings, shared a pulse of synchronized derision. "And what exactly," asked Sub-Minister Quo of the Toran hegemony, his translucent membranes flaring with skepticism, "do they bring with them? Some primitive pet?" The word pet was pronounced with such distaste that the Toran delegate might as well have spat it out. For the beings of the Galactic Corps, the idea of caring for non-sentient creatures, particularly for companionship, was so alien it bordered on the absurd. Ambassador Zalex's 7 eyes focused on the airlock as it hissed open. His form remained rigid, his posture exuding superiority. The human diplomat entered with measured grace, her blue uniform impeccably pressed. She was tall for her species, with short dark hair that seemed to promise efficiency rather than style. Her gaze swept over the gathered aliens, unbothered by their stares, neither intimidated nor awed. And by her side, with a visible physical restraint tether attached, was a creature that drew the most unsettling attention. A golden retriever with its alert triangular ears and a tail that wagged with the casual innocence of an animal, unaware of the cultural firestorm it was about to ignite. "Greetings," the human said with a short bow. Her translator worked flawlessly, but many of the diplomats were too distracted by the creature at her side to process the formalities. "I am Ambassador Name, appointed by Earth. Thank you for welcoming us to Harmonious Unity Station." The golden retriever sat obediently at her side, tail wagging in rhythm with her steps. "I do not understand," the Rayan delegate muttered, antennae twitching. "You bring a non-sentient organism to a diplomatic event?" The human ambassador's eyes softened, yet there was a glint of something resolute in her gaze as she replied. "This is my companion. Where I go, he goes. That is human diplomatic protocol." The question that followed, spoken by Chief Negotiator Seville of the Menat Consciousness, had been in the air since the moment the dog entered the station. His glowing neural implants flickered with curiosity. "You maintain a master-slave relationship with a creature of inferior intelligence?" The human did not flinch, but the others watching could sense the ripple of tension that followed. "Not a slave. He's family," she said, the words spoken with quiet certainty, as though explaining something simple to beings who, despite their intelligence and sophistication, had not yet understood the deepest truths about life. The dog, now at her side, let out a soft whine, its ears pricked up at the various sounds around it. The room seemed to fall silent. "Well," said Ambassador Zalex, his voice barely hiding his amusement, "this is fascinating." But surely, Ambassador, you must understand, this behavior, this attachment, is a relic of a more primitive time. You would be surprised, the human ambassador replied, her eyes softening as she knelt down beside her companion. The dog licked her face, and she responded with a small smile, running her hand through its golden fur. Sometimes, Ambassador, the simplest things are the most important. The delegates, many of whom communicated telepathically, shared confused signals as they observed this peculiar interaction. Some whispered about the oddity of a human placing so much value in a creature that lacked any form of intellectual or technological contribution to the grand scheme of things. Still, the ambassador stood resolute. "Shall we proceed to the reception?" she asked, her voice firm but polite, as if the entire room hadn't just been thrown into a moment of collective confusion. Ambassador Escalates, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in tone, gestured towards the grand hall. "Of course, but I must admit I had not anticipated this." The human ambassador straightened, glancing briefly at her companion. He was a simple creature, but his presence was a subtle rebellion against everything the Galactic Diplomatic Corps had considered evolved. And as they walked forward, a new sense of unease settled over the room. A question unspoken, but shared by all. Could this primitive bond really have any value in the grand cosmos? The reception hall of Harmonious Unity Station was vast, its high walls adorned with translucent screens that flickered with intricate alien symbols and breathtaking holograms. The room hummed with a subdued elegance, where discussions about interstellar trade routes, scientific collaboration, and cultural exchange programs took place in soft murmurs. The decor, curated to impress, was meticulously designed to reflect the taste and sophistication of the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Exquisite alien materials and technologies blended seamlessly with aesthetics that could only be described as the height of evolved civilization. Yet, in the midst of this grandeur, something was amiss. The human ambassador moved through the crowd with practiced ease, offering polite nods to various species and engaging in diplomatic exchanges. Her companion, the golden retriever, trotted at her side, occasionally stopping to sniff the air, distracted by the unfamiliar scents. The gathered delegates, many of whom were older and more advanced than humanity could ever hope to be, observed the odd pair with a mix of curiosity and open disdain. "I understand they still use combustion engines," said Ambassador Escalates to his counterpart, the Kiveth delegate, his voice tinged with a disapproving hiss. "And look, this creature here, a pet, not even capable of speech. How barbaric!" The Kiveth delegate, a creature whose smooth metallic skin reflected the ambient light, gave a long, thoughtful pause before responding. "There is something strange in their bond. Their attachment to these creatures. It's primitive, unnecessary. Does it not limit their potential?" Escalates's 7 limbs shifted uncomfortably, his antennae flicking in nervous confusion. "It's the sort of thing we see with species in their infancy, just before they reach true independence." Meanwhile, the human ambassador continued to move through the room, her dog occasionally receiving affectionate pats from her. A few species expressed disbelief at the act, exchanging glances of incredulity. This behavior, this unscientific emotional attachment to a non-sentient animal, was nothing short of puzzling to beings whose minds transcended the physical. "I'm sorry, Ambassador," said Chief Negotiator Seville, floating over on gravitic plates with his usual detached elegance. "But may I ask, what is the practical purpose of your, companion? Surely this relationship is a relic of the past." The human ambassador paused mid-conversation, her calm eyes never leaving the dog. He had sat obediently by her side, his fur gleaming softly under the lights, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. "He's my companion," the human said quietly, her voice carrying weight. "His purpose is not utility, it's connection. He's here because he makes my life richer. Not every relationship needs to have a practical function. Some things just bring joy. The alien delegates fell silent, their neural implants processing the concept at various speeds. Some were confused, others dismissive. "But why choose something so inferior?" asked Sub-Minister Quo, his voice dripping with the usual alien arrogance. "This animal. It cannot even appreciate art or contribute to science. What value could it possibly have?" The human ambassador sighed, her hand reaching down to gently scratch behind the dog's ears. The golden retriever responded with a low, contented rumble, leaning into the touch. "Value isn't always measured in intellect or productivity," she replied softly. "It's about something deeper, something beyond what can be quantified." The diplomatic attaché of the Crystal Concordat, a being of dazzling crystalline formation whose body refracted the station's artificial light in all directions, floated forward, their voice filled with scientific curiosity. "So your species chooses to form bonds with creatures that cannot even engage in philosophical discourse? How curious." The ambassador's expression softened. "Yes, exactly," she said. "Sometimes it's the simplest things that make life worth living. You see, not everything needs to be about efficiency or complexity." This time, the surrounding delegates did not respond immediately. Instead, they turned their attention back to the golden retriever, whose tail wagged gently, as if in response to the unsaid thoughts of those around him. There was something deeply unsettling about the creature's simplicity, a reminder of a more innocent, organic connection that had long been lost to the advanced civilizations present. Some of the delegates found it alienating, while others couldn't help but watch in fascination. Across the room, Chief Science Officer Vin of the Manat Consciousness, a being whose mind existed both within and beyond physical space, was deeply absorbed in observing the interaction between the ambassador and the dog. The diplomat's words lingered in their mind, resonating with something they had never fully understood until now. "Is this what binds you?" Vin finally asked, their voice conveying deep curiosity. "Is this bond a form of symbiosis? Can it explain your emotional state better than our neural patterns or our biotech enhancements ever could?" The human paused, her fingers lightly brushing the dog's back. "It's not about survival or advancement," she said. "Sometimes the highest form of intelligence is in being able to connect with others without needing anything in return." The dog looked up at her with bright, trusting eyes, as if understanding the conversation better than any of the delegates ever could. As the reception continued, the diplomats drifted into their usual exchanges. Discussions about trade routes, mining rights, and the latest scientific endeavors resumed. Yet, in the background, the human ambassador and her dog stood apart from the rest, an unspoken question hanging over the room. Could such a primitive bond hold true power? The reception had, by all outward appearances, returned to its expected rhythm. Alien dignitaries resumed their discussions, and the quiet hum of polite conversation filled the air once again. The human ambassador, however, had little time to enjoy the renewed calm. Her mind, sharpened by years of diplomatic service, had already begun to sense something lurking just beneath the surface of the station's tranquil exterior. Her golden retriever, Heck, had grown increasingly agitated, his behavior noticeably shifting since the earlier tensions in the hall. His once casual tail wagging had slowed, his ears were perked forward, and his body remained poised with a certain tautness. He was sensing something. The human ambassador knelt beside him, her hand resting on his back. She looked down at his expressive brown eyes, which locked with hers in silent communication. He was trying to tell her something. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, her voice low enough for only the dog to hear. Heck let out a quiet whine, and the ambassador stood, glancing around the room. Her gaze swept over the delegates, all engrossed in their conversations, but her instincts told her that something wasn't quite right. "Ambassador?" Chief Negotiator Seville's voice broke her concentration, floating over to her. "Is there an issue with your companion?" The human ambassador stood straight, masking her concern with practiced poise. "No issue, Chief Negotiator," she said calmly, forcing a smile. "But thank you for your concern." "Of course," Seville replied, his glowing neural implants pulsing with faint intrigue. "It's simply that such unconventional relationships are, well, quite unexpected, wouldn't you agree?" The ambassador's eyes briefly flicked back to Heck. "Sometimes the unexpected is exactly what keeps us grounded," she answered cryptically. The words barely left her mouth when the station's environmental systems emitted a low, barely perceptible hum. At first, no one took notice of the subtle shift. Then, almost as if responding to the deepening unease in the ambassador's chest, the air around them thickened, a faint metallic scent, just sharp enough to stir suspicion. It was followed by a sudden dip in temperature. The lights flickered for an instant before stabilizing. Heck's body tensed, his hackles raised. His eyes were fixed on the eastern corridor, ears angled forward in the direction of something unseen. The other delegates, too, began to sense a shift in the atmosphere, but it was subtle, a ripple of discomfort in the air like a gust of wind before a storm. "I'm not sure I like this," the ambassador said under her breath, her hand moving to Heck's harness. "Something's wrong." Before she could make another move, the station's AI spoke up, its usually smooth voice cracking with unusual urgency. "We are experiencing a minor technical disruption," the AI announced, though its tone did nothing to reassure the room. "Please remain calm while maintenance protocols are being initiated." The human ambassador didn't wait for further reassurances. She could feel it now. A presence, an unseen force creeping through the walls, just beyond reach. Something was coming. She instinctively reached for Heck, feeling a sense of urgency settle over her. The dog whined softly, and the ambassador whispered to him, her voice low but firm. "Stay close, Heck." Suddenly, the emergency alarms blared, followed by the unmistakable sound of a station-wide lockdown being activated. The lights dimmed, and an eerie silence descended upon the room as the emergency lumens flared to life, casting the delegates' forms in a blood-red glow. The gathered representatives of the Galactic Diplomatic Corps froze, some scanning the room in confusion, others exchanging uneasy glances. "Attention!" The AI's voice echoed again, now distorted and warbling. "The station is under control of an unknown faction. All personnel are to remain in designated areas. Resistance will result in atmospheric decompression of non-essential sectors." At that moment, the doors to the eastern corridor slammed open with a violent hiss. A group of imposing figures emerged, silhouettes standing tall against the pale light. They were clad in dark armor, exuding an aura of menace that made the already silent crowd shrink back. The word VX sovereignty resonated through the translator circuits of every delegate present, sending waves of shock through the assembly. The golden retriever growled low in his throat, every muscle taut with an unseen tension. The ambassador's hand tightened on his harness. "Stay here," she whispered firmly. "Stay close." But it was too late. The station had already been breached. "You!" the leader of the intruders growled, his voice a guttural, menacing hiss. The figure's form shimmered momentarily, revealing a large, cybernetically enhanced being, its body adorned with scarred plating and weaponry. "You are Earth's representative, correct?" The ambassador remained calm, her voice steady, but her eyes never leaving the intruder. "Yes, I am Ambassador Name from Earth. And who are you?" "Does it matter?" The leader's voice dripped with contempt. "Your kind have interfered with matters you don't understand. The Outer Rim will no longer be under the thumb of your so-called Galactic Concord." You have ignored us for far too long. Now it is your turn to pay." The delegates exchanged uneasy glances, their minds already calculating how to respond to the threat, only to be halted by the sudden flash of movement. Heck, sensing the tension in the air, had already made his move. With a sharp bark, the golden retriever launched himself toward the intruders, his teeth bared in a snarl that sent the approaching soldiers scattering in surprise. "Stay back!" the ambassador shouted, but it was too late. The dog wasn't just attacking, he was protecting. The VX sovereignty soldiers hesitated, their neural implants struggling to make sense of the situation. The dog, simple in his understanding but fierce in his devotion, had already begun his charge. His focus was not on the soldiers but on the ambassador, on keeping her safe. The intruders were not prepared for such a reaction from an animal they deemed beneath notice. The leader's arm went up, a neural disruptor aimed squarely at the dog, but before the shot could be fired, Heck dodged with an agility that stunned even the seasoned warriors. The golden retriever barreled forward, his powerful limbs propelling him through the chaos of shifting bodies and unfamiliar gravity. In an impossible arc, Heck leapt toward the intruder, clamping his teeth down on the leader's weapon arm with devastating precision. The weapon misfired, a burst of energy shooting wildly across the room, missing its target by mere inches. The ambassador, despite the pandemonium, moved with calm precision. She wasn't just a diplomat, she was a fighter, trained in the harshest corners of Earth's battlefields. With a swift movement, she retrieved her concealed baton, the sharp crack of metal slicing the air as she incapacitated one of the approaching VX soldiers. "Get him!" the leader shouted, regaining his balance but clearly rattled by the dog's unexpected resistance. "Kill that beast!" But Heck was already in motion again, darting between the enemy soldiers, drawing their fire with calculated movements. Each time they aimed at him, he was already out of range, always moving with purpose, toward his human. The station's AI, now completely overwhelmed, struggled to offer a solution. The entire reception had descended into chaos. The human ambassador's eyes were locked on the dog, her heart pounding with pride and terror in equal measure. This was no longer about diplomacy. This was about survival. "Stay close, Heck," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We'll get through this together." The chaos in the reception hall escalated with frightening speed. The hiss of energy blasts, the sharp tang of ozone, and the frantic shouts of alien delegates filled the air. In the center of it all stood the human ambassador, her body moving with the precise fluidity of someone trained in more than just diplomacy. She was in her element now. This was no longer about formal pleasantries or interstellar negotiations. This was survival. Beside her, Heck, her golden retriever, was an unstoppable force. His movements were calculated, every leap and snarl a step toward ensuring his human safety. The aliens had underestimated him, and now, in the midst of their most sophisticated defenses, they were finding out just how dangerous that mistake was. The VX sovereignty soldiers, with their cybernetic limbs and advanced weaponry, were being thrown into disarray by the dog's primal instincts. They had expected an easy conquest, a simple mission to seize control of the station and its diplomats. But Heck was a force they had not accounted for. The ambassador's hand tightened around her baton as she moved with military precision, her steps synchronized with the dog's movements. She fought not only for her life but for the lives of the diplomats who had gathered here under the false impression that they were invulnerable. Heck darted around the room, weaving between tables and overturned chairs with impressive speed, drawing the fire of the VX soldiers away from his human. Each time a shot was fired, he was already gone, too fast, too unpredictable. He was no longer just a pet, a companion. He was a warrior, fighting for the one person he was bound to protect, no matter the cost. The leader of the VX sovereignty, still reeling from the unexpected resilience of the dog, barked orders to his troops. "Target the animal! Don't let it get close! But it was already too late. Heck leapt into the air, his body a blur of gold and muscle, and tackled one of the soldiers with the force of a meteor strike. The soldier screamed as Heck's teeth sank deep into the exposed cybernetic joints, effectively immobilizing him. The ambassador, watching her companion in action, felt a surge of pride mixed with a wave of protective instinct. She didn't hesitate. With the baton in hand, she moved forward, swiftly incapacitating another soldier by striking at the neural cluster with precision. The sound of the disruptor powering down echoed in her mind as the VX soldier collapsed. "Focus!" The leader of the VX sovereignty growled, his patience wearing thin. He raised his weapon again, targeting Heck's back. The ambassador's heart skipped a beat. Time seemed to slow as she saw the weapon charging, its energy humming ominously. Without thinking, she threw herself into the line of fire. The blast hit her shoulder, sending her staggering to the ground. A scream of pain slipped from her lips, but she clenched her teeth and fought against the dizziness that tried to cloud her vision. Her shoulder felt like it was on fire, but the burning pain was secondary to her primary focus. Heck. He was still fighting, still protecting her, and she would not fail him. "Heck!" she shouted, her voice strained but resolute. The golden retriever turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. His growl deepened, and in that instant, he surged toward her attacker. His body moved with an almost unnatural speed, propelled by a mix of instinct, loyalty, and a fierce desire to protect. The VX leader's face twisted into a snarl as he raised his weapon for another shot, but before he could fire, Heck was upon him. The dog slammed into the VX leader, knocking the weapon from his hands. With a powerful snarl, Heck's teeth found their mark, sinking into the leader's cybernetic limbs and disabling the weapon system entirely. The leader struggled, but Heck held firm, his grip unyielding. The ambassador, still struggling to stay upright, moved toward them, her legs shaky from the pain in her shoulder. "Heck!" she called again, this time her voice filled with relief. But the golden retriever, despite the danger, was not finished. With a fierce bark, he released the leader's cybernetic limb and shifted, positioning himself between the ambassador and the remaining soldiers. His hackles were raised, and every fiber of his being radiated warning. Anyone who tried to approach would have to go through him first. The remaining VX soldiers hesitated, their neural implants buzzing with conflicting orders. The sight of the dog, so simple, so primal, had somehow disrupted their carefully laid plans. The ambassador's presence, her calm resilience despite the chaos, had left them rattled. What they thought would be a simple mission to intimidate the galactic diplomatic elite had turned into an unexpected battle, one that was rapidly turning in favor of a creature they considered beneath them. In the background, the other delegates, who had taken cover behind the station's reinforced walls, began to stir. Chief Science Officer Vin of the Menat Consciousness, observing the unfolding chaos, had begun to question everything. The dog's behavior was no longer simply a curiosity. It was something else entirely, something that defied their understanding of intelligence, loyalty, and strength. The VX leader, now breathing heavily, snarled in frustration. His soldiers were pinned down by a single dog, an animal that had no business being here, fighting like a seasoned warrior. His vision was clouded by a mix of confusion and anger. He had expected to dominate, to prove the superiority of his faction. But instead, the ambassador's dog had proven something much more significant, that loyalty, love, and a deep, almost primal bond were more powerful than any weapon or technological advantage. "You should have stayed out of this," the VX leader growled. But there was a tremor in his voice now, one that hadn't been there before. "I'm afraid," the ambassador said, her voice steady. "That's where you're wrong." With a sharp motion, she pulled herself to her feet, her baton still in hand. She moved with the confidence of someone who had been through far worse than this. Her eyes never left the VX leader. "This is not over." Heck, sensing his human's resolve, gave one last bark, a sound that reverberated in the tense silence of the room. He wasn't done. Not yet. The ambassador stepped forward, drawing herself into a defensive stance, ready for the next move, and the VX sovereignty leader, despite his fury, understood that they were no longer in control. The bond between human and animal had shattered their expectations. The tide had turned. The room was filled with an almost palpable tension, the air thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The remaining VX sovereignty soldiers, their limbs heavy with cybernetic enhancements, were hesitant now. They had come to the reception expecting an easy conquest. What they hadn't anticipated was a dog, a simple, non-sentient creature, becoming their greatest obstacle. The ambassador stood tall despite the blood trickling from her shoulder, her eyes locked onto the VX leader, now kneeling on the ground, struggling to regain his balance. Heck, her golden retriever, stood between them, his fur bristling, his body poised in a defensive stance. Every muscle in the dog's body was taut, his growls deep and steady, as if daring any of the remaining soldiers to move closer. The ambassador's hand still gripped her baton, ready to strike, but she didn't need to. Heck was enough. The dog had already proven his worth beyond anything the diplomats or the VX sovereignty had ever expected. "You've made a grave mistake," the ambassador said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Her eyes flicked over the soldiers, who were now assessing their options, clearly aware that their mission had gone terribly awry. The VX leader, his expression twisted with frustration, slowly pushed himself to his feet. "You can't stop us," he growled, his voice laced with venom. "You've interfered in matters that don't concern you. The Outer Rim will no longer bow to your—" He didn't get a chance to finish his sentence. Heck let out a powerful bark, and with lightning speed, he lunged forward, his teeth sinking into the leader's remaining cybernetic limb. The leader cried out, his body jerking as the golden retriever's grip disabled his weapon. "Stay down," the ambassador said firmly, her baton raised but not yet striking. "You've lost." For a long moment, the VX leader remained still, his mandibles clicking in frustration, his soldiers now immobilized by the dog's swift and deadly strikes. It was clear that there was no escaping the human and her companion. With a final defiant hiss, the VX leader signaled for his remaining troops to retreat, though their posture was anything but confident. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake had cost them. As the soldiers began to withdraw, the ambassador slowly lowered her baton, her gaze still fixed on the retreating intruders. Heck, once more, moved beside her, his body still alert but no longer in a combat stance. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. The golden retriever's tail wagged with enthusiasm, and he leaned into her touch. It was the simple act of companionship that had made all the difference in this moment, and the ambassador couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the bond they shared. The strength between them had not been born from technology or strategy, but from something far more ancient and primal: love, loyalty, and the unbreakable trust between them. The room was still, the emergency alarms now silenced, the red emergency lighting slowly returning to a calmer, more neutral hue. The remaining delegates, once huddled in fear, began to stir, exchanging looks of astonishment as they watched the scene unfold. The human ambassador straightened, her posture still resolute, but her expression softened. She knew the diplomatic repercussions would be far-reaching. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps had long prided itself on its advanced practices, its intellectual superiority, and its disregard for the primitive nature of species like hers. But today, that had changed. Today, humanity had shown them something they couldn't understand, something they might never fully comprehend. "Are you all right, Ambassador?" Chief Negotiator Seville asked, his tone now far more respectful than it had been when the chaos first began. He floated toward her with his glowing neural implants pulsing in curiosity. The ambassador nodded, her gaze never leaving Heck. "I'll be fine, thanks to my companion." The chief science officer, Vin, who had been watching the entire event unfold with silent fascination, approached next. "I have never witnessed anything like this," Vin said, his voice quiet but filled with genuine awe. "Your species, you bond with creatures like this, and yet you fight together as one. It is beyond what our understanding of intelligence would predict." The ambassador gave a small smile, her eyes meeting the aliens with a knowing look. "Sometimes," she said, "the most powerful things are the simplest." The room was silent for a moment, as the weight of her words settled over the gathering. The delegates, the dignitaries, and even the other representatives from various species began to understand that there was something in the human connection to their companion species, something that transcended intellect, something that spoke directly to the heart. Sub-Minister Quo of the Toran hegemony, once so disdainful of the human attachment to their inferior animals, now spoke with a new tone, softer and less dismissive. "Perhaps we have underestimated you, Ambassador. Perhaps your bond with this creature has more value than we understood." The ambassador's eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself a genuine smile. "Perhaps," she said, "we all have more to learn." As the delegates slowly began to move forward, the human ambassador stood tall once more, her dog by her side. The battle was over, but the lessons had only just begun. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps would need time to reassess their views on human nature, on loyalty, and on what truly made a species great. And as the ambassador turned to leave, Heck trotting loyally beside her, she knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen something today that it could never unsee, and that, she thought, was the real victory. "Let's go home, Heck," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet pride. And with that, they left the chamber, leaving behind a room full of stunned delegates and an uncertain future, but one that, for once, was filled with new possibilities.